Hello everybody, and thanks very much for tuning in to Artefact Storytelling Live once again. Hope you've had a good week. This week we're going to be talking about poetry. Now, I know that scares quite a lot of people. We seem to have this very odd relationship with poetry where we seem to listen to it or read it when we get married and then when we die. And it doesn't seem to come into our lives at any other part. But I think poetry is super important, and I hope tonight to be able to give you some ideas about why and what we can do about it. So if you have any thoughts on this before I even start, please pop them in the chat. Everything seems to be working. If you can hear me, let me know, please, because we've had problems in the past. So I'd appreciate that. If anyone's on there that can just give me a little nod that we're working, I would absolutely appreciate it. So yeah, I'm just checking the streams. Everything looks terrific. Great. Now, let's just have a think about what poetry is. Quite often this is the hardest question. And thanks, Ross, for your letting me know that it's all good. Thank you, that's good. Oh, and thank you there as well on YouTube. Thank you very much. I had to think about it, and it means something to me, but that doesn't mean it means the same to everybody else. So I think the relevance, and the reason that I chose to do poetry this week was that, you know, a lot of us have been reflecting on lockdown, possibly coming back. Hi, thanks, Paul. And I think whilst at the moment our lives, before COVID, our lives were very much focused on the outer world. It was all about going to work, going to the office, coming home, flying away somewhere, being busy. And I think that is the opposite of poetry. I think what poetry is about is really about not those external conversations, because for many of us, those external conversations have stopped. And that has meant, I mean, one of my favourite poets, who I won't talk much about today unless someone wants me to, but Charles Bukowski, he said isolation is a gift in one of his most famous poems. And I'm not sure I agree with that entirely, because quite often isolation can be a threat, as many of us are experiencing if the mental health stats are anything to go by. But I think what poetry can do is look inside. It can help you see something from another perspective. It can help you see something from inside you. And I think that, for me, currently is the reason that I enjoy poetry so much. And just to let you know, I mean, my relationship with poetry is probably, excuse me, is probably a bit over the top, because every morning I read poetry. I want my morning routine. Hold on. My morning routine starts with reading. I read Rainer Maria Rilke, who I'm going to talk about today, who was a German poet. I read some Stoic, more aphorisms than poetry most days, and I read Tolstoy most days, nearly every day. And within those three amazingly different but beautiful pieces of writing, I take great strength from that. And when I talk, as I do for a living, quite often I use the words from the poets to get across to people in the audience that, the internal thing is the thing we have to start with. And I will definitely come back to that with a poet I'm going to talk about in a minute. So that's it for me. But I know there's a vast range of definitions. I know that people have different perspectives on it. But if you remember last week, and I'll just remind you of the caption, I talked last week about Adrienne Rich, and she said that poetry can break open locked chambers of possibility. And I think that nails it, because even when you speak to poets, and I will tell you a story about a poet that I know very well. Well, not very well, I know him quite well. I think sometimes if you read a poem, I don't think you've read it properly. If you read a poem and understand it, I'm not sure it's a very good poem, because a lot of poets don't know what their poetry means. And there's a reason for that, and I promise I will come back to that. So we're going to do it slightly differently today, because it's about poetry, but I wanted to create a link, even if it's tenuous, to what we talked about last week. So let me just take off those wonderful words and get back onto my graphics. And I'm gonna start by linking last week, which was about myth, to poetry. Now, it might not surprise you. There's not a lot of poetry about superheroes. But actually I found one. And this is I've known about this poem for a while. And I think it does the thing that I think poetry does best. It focuses on an individual's experience. So it's not trying to tell the whole story. It's focusing on an individual's experience in a particular moment. And it's trying to help. Well, it's interesting. I'm interested in your perspectives on this. It's either trying to help the person the poem's about. It's perhaps referring to one of the characters that the poem's about, or it might be neither of those. and that's the terrific thing about poetry. But let me just check the chat before I do anything else. Thanks, Paul. Nice to see you, Paul, joining us. Paul Crick, excellent, good man. Let me just double check on the big grotty platform that is YouTube. YouTube is the streamer's nightmare, despite the fact that it's so popular for streamers. You should see that it is so sugary. Good Scottish word, eh? We will talk about vernacular one week. It's so sugary that it drives me nuts. But Ross is on there. Thank you very much. There's a couple of others. Yeah, hello there, people. Don't know who you are. Nice to meet you. Anyway, so the first poem we're going to look at is called Wonder Woman. And it's glorious, this piece of poetry. But I'm going to show you the words and I'm going to read them to you. I'm not going to do that with other poems today, but I couldn't find a good recording of this one to show you. So what I'll do is I'll show you. And this is a poem, as I say, by this lady called Ada Lemon. And I'd never heard of Ada Lemon until about maybe 6 years ago. And this is one of our, it's not as well known, this, but let me read it to you. I'm not pretending I'm a great orator or anything with this sort of thing, but let me read it to you. Standing at the swell of the muddy Mississippi after the urgent care doctor had just said, well, sometimes shit happens. I fell fast and hard for New Orleans all over again. Pain pills swirled in the purse along with a spell for later. It's taken a while for me to admit I'm in a raging battle with my body. A spinal column 35 degrees bent, vertigo that comes and goes like a DC Comics villain nobody can kill. Invisible pain is both a blessing and a curse. You always look so happy, said a stranger once as I shifted to my good side grinning. But that day alone on the riverbank, brass blaring from the steamboat Natchez, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a girl, maybe half my age, dressed for no apparent reason as Wonder Woman. She strutted by in all her strength and glory, invincible, eternal, and when I stood to clap, because who wouldn't have, she bowed and posed like she knew I needed a myth, a woman by a river, indestructible. Well, I love it. What do you think of that? What do you think the story is that Ada is trying to tell? What did you think of that, folks? Let's have a look. Thank you. Beautiful. Yes. What do you think the story is that she's trying to tell us in that poem? There's a little lag on LinkedIn, so I'll just wait a couple of seconds for everybody to get on the same page. There's so many elements in that poem that, I mean, she uses alliteration a lot. She talks about, beautifully describes how the character, the lady, is suffering from terrible, terrible pain. And I think that certainly burns into your psyche. The doctor, well, I thought, when I heard it the first time, I thought, oh, he's a dick. You know, being so blunt, but hey, we've all experienced that. I'm not sure what pain pills swirled in the purse along with a spell for later. I'm not sure what that means. If any of you have got an idea, let me know. I'd like to talk to the author about that. But the next line, I'm in a raging battle with my body. God, I mean, it so summarises what it must feel like to have such a severe disease. But then I think the character that beguiles and surprises you is when Wonder Woman appears herself. And the little girl, the language that she uses, I think is brilliant. Strutted, strength, glory, invincible, eternal. These are not words that are often used in the feminine context. So as you will probably gather, this is a poem that's very much quoted in the feminist literature for being one of showing how women can take strength from other women. But I think it goes beyond that, because I like the fact that there's this moment at the end where you're unclear, because she says she bowed and posed like she knew I needed a myth. So that's like what we were talking about last week, folks, as if she needed a myth. But then it ends saying, a woman by a river, indestructible. Now, is that talking about the girl, or is it talking about the character that the poetry is about? I don't know. But I think if I was suffering from that type of malady, I would take a very positive message from that very final line, a woman indestructible. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Ada. I think she's worth reading if you haven't read her work at all or heard of her work. And she's someone that many of her poems are fantastic. And what I'll do in the details when I send this out, I'll actually put in a couple of examples or links to some of her other work so that you can have a look at it. So that's the first one I'd like to just leave it with you. And if you do think about it and have anything comes to you, please let me know what you think, because I personally love it, but you might hate it. So tell me if you hate it. I want to know why. So next up, and I forgot to show you this earlier. Next up, so Ada's the one down, obviously the one on the bottom who seems to be falling off the page. Next up, I'm going to tell you about someone that I know. I don't know him terribly well, but I know I've met him 2 or 3 times, and it's the chap on the left-hand side of your screen here. And this is a chap called David White. Now, David, what I said earlier when I said that the poets don't often, or sometimes don't know themselves what the poetry means when they're telling their stories about these microcosms of human life. It's actually David that made that clear for me, because I had the pleasure about 2 years ago now, first time I met him, was in an amazing hotel in the Cotswolds where I live, actually. It was about 20 miles from here. And it was a 3-day thing where we had to... meet him in the evening. We had a drink with him. We all had a chat. There was only about 15 of us there. The next day was a full-on session, and I will come back to that later. But I ended up, I wonder why, at with a glass of red wine, a great big glass of red wine, and the log fire, and who was sitting across from me but David White. So I had a wonderful, lucky experience with David. So I asked him, I don't understand some of your poetry. I mean, some of your poetry is completely, I just cannot get up. It's weird. It's like music. You know how sometimes you listen to music and it can be like, if you like music and it could be a German, like I like Rammstein, German rock band. Don't know, haven't a clue what they're saying, but I love it. And I think there's something similar with poetry. But anyway, I said it to him. I said, look, explain this poem. And I won't tell you what one it was. I'm going to show you in a minute. But I said, what's it about, David? And he said, well, quite frankly, Scott, I wrote that 20 years ago and I can't remember what I was thinking when I wrote it. And in fact, in the moment when I was writing it, I didn't know what I was going to write. And I thought, oh gosh. So again, this is back to what I said earlier about that. It can unveil secrets. So that's the first, and I'm going to leave it about that, and I'm going to let you hear the poem now, because this poem, now I know a couple of you have heard this before because you've commented on it on my LinkedIn and Facebook profiles. I've got a quick comment from Paul. David White is a phenomenal writer. Love his poetry. Glad you met him. Yeah, I'll tell you more about him in a minute. Paul, he's an incredible guy. This poem of David's, I think I do understand it, but 6 months ago, I was doing, if you remember, for those of you who have joined me before, I pride myself in, one of the things I try to do is mind my own life. When I'm working, I don't copy other people's stories. I want to tell my own stories. And I was remembering that experience I had with David. And at the time, I've posted something on LinkedIn about this a minute ago, about half an hour ago. At the time, I was going through a pretty rough time. It's just at lockdown. My business had fallen apart, and I was reflecting and thinking, which bar am I going to get a job in, or which farm am I going to pick tatties in? Went all Scottish there, and I remembered this moment. I remembered this experience. So this is David himself reading half of one of his poems. You don't need to do the whole thing. I'll leave it to you to tell me what you think. But this is Start Close In by David White. Sorry, played you the wrong one. After setting that up, where is it? Sorry, guys. Yeah, I've got it here. Sorry about that. Just give me a minute. So this is Start Close In by David White. And this particular version of this, it was played as part of a TED Talk that he did about 18 months ago. And I don't understand the TED Talk. I don't know if has anyone seen the TED Talk, Paul? I don't know if you've seen it, but I don't understand it. And I'd love to talk to him about it, and I will. But anyway, this is it. Sorry for the slight cock up there with the wrong one.
Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question. Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple. To hear another's voice, follow your own voice. Wait until that voice becomes a private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take.
Now, I hope you like that. I start close in with the step you don't want to take. It came to me again, as I said, 6 months ago when I was sitting, and honestly, I just lost 23 events. I had got really frustrated about, the financial implications of that. And then I heard this thing saying, start close in with the step you don't want to take. And I then was taken quickly back to that night with David by the fire, logs burning in a beautiful Cotswold hotel. And he said this to me. And this is, I said I'd come back to that conversation. He said to me, "So tell me about your endings." And I was like, "What?" What are the? Tell me about the stages in your life. And I understood that, and I said, "Oh, right." So I went, and I bored him, no doubt, with my personal history and where I grew up and the jobs I'd had, etc. And I won't bore you with that. But he said, interesting. He said, that poem's about endings. So I whizzed forward 6 months ago, and I thought, endings. We're all full of endings. So, for example, the adolescent you is not the same as the 20-year-old you. The 20-year-old you is not the same as the 30-year-old you. The you who had a baby is not the you after you've had a baby, whether you're a man or a woman. And that ending piece, I was fighting that 6 months ago. I knew here somewhere that my world was done. I was at an end point. And although I denied it, as I said in my LinkedIn post earlier, I denied it. It took me, I think I had 2 weeks I went off the rails, and then I just went completely off the rails, drank too much, just was feeling really sorry for myself. But then I remembered the words that David had said and the story that he told me that night about meaning and about endings, and I thought, right, hold on. Why am I fighting this ending? Because all the other endings, I fought them as well, didn't do me any good. Particularly when I went from the science world into the business world, I did not want to do business. I wanted to stay in science. I wanted to cut up dead bodies for the rest of my life. I know I'm weird, but I didn't want to do it. But I did, and I don't regret it now. I did at the time, but I don't regret it now. And that absolutely transformed me again 6 months ago. And I thought, right, you need to stop that. That was another version of me. And let's start building the new version of me. And that's what I've spent the last probably 5 months doing. I got over my stupid Scott self at the beginning. And I started to think about where I could take myself. So that poem, I hope that's making sense to some of you, maybe not, but it's the truth. That poem absolutely helped me get through something. And I don't think anything tells that microcosmic story better than poetry. What do you think, guys? Does that make sense? Yes, says Anonymous on YouTube. Thank you. Anonymous, thank you very much for joining. Next time, sign in so I can use your name, because you deserve it for contributing. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Not just now. Okay. You're all sitting quiet this week. See, I told you it'd be different. Told you it'd be different from last week. It was a deep listen, says Ross. It is quite deep. Why was it deep, Ross? What made it feel deep? I think I agree with you, but it's I want to know what you think. I think it is quite deep, but there's something about it that drills into you. I mean, David has, some people find it annoying, the way he speaks, because he repeats lines frequently. And what I asked him about that as well, and what he said was, it's to put across a point. So he said, if you're singing and you've got a word you want to emphasize, you really emphasize it. And with poetry, particularly when you're reading it, he feels that sometimes you've got to repeat the words. And I get that. I'm not sure I would do it myself, but I get what he's doing. Paul says absolutely makes sense and had a similar impact. Really, Paul? Oh, I'd love to hear about that. Maybe you could, if you're minded, you could come back on and talk about that again, Paul, with me, because I've worked out how to do guests on here as well, so I can do that again. So thanks, Ross, for coming back. I feel it was deep in terms of the words being used, plus the music captured the mood. Yeah. Now, it won't surprise you that I'm also going to do a session on music, Ross, because you nailed it. The music really makes you think. Music can put you in states. Music also tells a story. We'll part the music bit and come back to it. But I think the words are very, very, I don't know what the word would be. Sonorous? Is that the word? There's something about the words that get you. So I'm going to move. Sorry, I keep coughing today. It's annoying. Now, the next one I'd like to do with you. Now, let me just make sure I put the right one on this time. The next one, I had a. This is another very powerful piece, and it came to me. The whole story, it came to me about 30 odd years ago. Have you ever heard of the film Awakenings with Robert De Niro when he was an actor, and the late great Robin Williams? And I was studying psychology at the time, and this guy here, Oliver Sacks, was one of the sort of the key people that we had to study at the time. I mean, he was like he's a bit of a psychology god, and he's one of the few, and I mean few, great storytellers in the sort of psychiatry world ever. He stands, in my view, head and shoulders above even the old-fashioned mystical guys like Freud and others. But and you may not know this, but the film Awakenings, if you've never seen it, I wish I'd never seen it. It is an utterly amazing film, beautiful film. And it's actually based on a true story, and the story is about Parkinson's disease and how Oliver, who is played by Robin Williams, and actually quite spookily well played by Robin Williams. When you see, a lot of folk have said, Robin Williams is a comic actor. I'll tell you what, he could do character acting, and he really nailed Oliver Sacks. He not only looked quite like him, but he had his intonation. I thought it was amazing. Anyway, in the film, Oliver is trying to, help all these Parkinson's patients, and he ends up with one particular patient. So in this clip from the movie, this is how I discovered this poet. And this poet's name is Rainer Maria Rilke. And this is the moment where the drugs, and I don't need to go into the detail, but the drugs that he'd given to De Niro's character had failed. They worked initially. He emerged from his deep Parkinson's state. He became normal, whatever that means. But then, despite giving him more and more of this drug, the character dropped back into the Parkinson's state. And Oliver, being Oliver, through Robin, was desperate to know more about what does it feel like? What is it like? How do you experience? What is the experience? Because he was trying to help people with Parkinson's. And this is the Hollywood take on it, which I think is beautiful, and Oliver writes about it in the book by the same name. So this is the moment in the film when he's been using a Ouija board, one of these things where you used to play with them when you were kids, pretending there was spirits and stuff. And this is the moment when he discovers how it felt to have Parkinson's disease.
His gaze, from staring through the bars, has grown so weary that it can take in nothing more. For him, it is as though there were 1,000 bars, and behind the 1,000 bars, no world. As he paces in cramped circles, over and over, his powerful strides are like a ritual dance around a center where a great will stands paralyzed. At times, the curtains of the eye lift without a sound, and a shape enters, slips through the tightened silence of the shoulders, reaches the heart, and dies.
Well, do you know, when I chose these last two poems, I didn't realise just how harrowing they can be. That's how it feels to have Parkinson's disease. And Rilke wrote the poem, 100 years before the film, obviously, but and he wrote it about, how it feels to be a wild animal caged in a zoo, and I think it's just terrifying. And I don't think there's a book that could explain it better than that not even 2-minute clip. And I think the way, even in the Hollywood style, that they went from the mystery of, I'd never heard of Rilke. I don't know if any of you have, but I'd never heard of Rainer Maria Rilke until that film came out. And even then, even when the film came out, I ignored it. And it was maybe 3 or 4 years later that I went back and discovered Rilke. And Rilke is now, as I say, one of my morning behaviours. I read Rilke every day. He's a beautiful, beautiful poet. But isn't that wonderful? And Ross, I'm sorry, it's a bit deep again. I'll try and lighten the mood in a minute, maybe not. But I think, again, it nails it. It just nails it. And I think the power of poetry and telling stories like that is just undeniably beautiful. And actually, given the way these poems have and the way they're sitting with me at the moment, and how they're sitting with you, they're quite heavy. And I've got another one that's very different in a minute. But I think we might need to do a second instalment of this with more uplifting poetry. Although Start Close In is uplifting, I think, but it is also deep. So what did you think of that, guys? Any thoughts on that before I move on to the final little section here? Another comment from my anonymous people on YouTube. That was scary. Beautiful. I'm getting a lot of beautiful. Isn't that nice? I'm quite touched by that. I don't know if anyone had heard the poem before, but it is rather gorgeous. It is rather gorgeous. Right. Now let me just make sure we've got all of this right. Right, now, how are we doing for time? We're okay for time. So the next one I want to do, and then I'm going to do my artifact after this one. And believe it or not, my artifact's also a poem, but you're going to have to suffer one of my poems, and I'm not a poet. So be prepared for that. The next one, I've been using this now for, I mentioned him earlier, Barkowski, about 20 years. And he is one of the Marmites of the poetry world. He is the only poet that I'm aware of who is published who uses the C word. There's none of that here today. I'm not going to do that to you. I also know that there's a school using these videos, so I'm not going to be swearing kids, don't worry, nor other poets. But he's a brutal poet. And if you've never heard of Barkowski, you may have heard of the film Barfly. That was about Barkowski. And if you've never seen that, it's pretty good. I think it's Mickey Rourke, isn't it? I think it is. Who played the part? If it wasn't Mickey Rourke, it should have been, because he's absolutely got the right thing about him. But this is a different angle on things. I think it's closer to the David Whyte poem than it is to the Ada poem. But again, it's one that I think tells a very powerful.
Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life. And the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. There are ways out. There is a light somewhere. If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind. Go all the way. It could mean eating for 4 days. It could mean freezing on a park bench. It could mean jail. It could mean derision, mockery, isolation. Isolation is the gift. All the others are a test of your endurance, of how much you really want to do it. And you'll do it, despite rejection and the worst odds. And it will be better than anything else you can imagine. If you're going to try, go all the way. There is no other feeling like that. You will be alone with the gods, and the nights will flame with fire. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. All the way. the way. You will ride life straight to perfect laughter. It's the only good fight there is.
Well, what do you think of that production? The first thing I'll say is that's read by a man who is the Banksy of poetry. No one knows who he is. He goes by the name of Tom of Bedlam, which is, I believe, is a character from a Keats poem. And if you go into YouTube and you type in his name, you'll find him. And he produces a lot of poetry and reads a lot of poetry, and quite beautifully. And he's been used in many movies, but nobody knows who he is. It's just like Banksy. Great voice, isn't he? Now that, actually, funny, playing it along with Start Close In, the David Whyte poem, it's rather good, isn't it? It's a really good couplet, because you've got the start with the step you don't want to take from David, and then you've got these words which are about, do it, do it, do it. Very, very powerful. Now, I've played this to large audiences, like 1,000 people, and I've asked them, I've polled them, and then said, "Look, who liked this, and who, what did you think?" Most people, said, "Yeah, I quite liked it," but a significant minority thought it was very misogynistic, very male, and that's why I chose it, because I thought it sat nice with Ada's poem about Wonder Woman. But nevertheless, it just shows and demonstrates that even in poetry, we have all these issues about diversity, and we have these issues about speaking across time to the generations. So I hope you enjoyed that, because I think it's again a beautiful poem, beautifully read. There's 2 other versions on the internet that are worth seeking out. One by a man who I haven't liked since 1984, Bono, or D Bono, as one of the guys in the radio calls him. Bono does a really good job of reading it. But the other great version is by the one and only Tom Waits. That was astounding from Doug. Thanks, Doug. It is astounding. Honestly, I know the word. I could recite it to you. I know the words to that poem. And every time I hear it, I've got them now. I get goosebumps. It just hits you like, there are stories that I love, books that I told you about last week and the week before in particular. But isn't it just beautiful? What's this? Reminds me of James Rhodes saying, "Find what you love and let it kill you." Yeah. Well, Barkowski says exactly the same thing. I've got a T-shirt with almost those words on it. It really is about, getting to your, what we spoke last week about Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell talked about getting to your bliss, finding your bliss. So I think a lot of these poets are in that space, in that thinking space, Paul. I don't know James Rhodes. I'll have to look at that. You need to tell me more about that. I don't know about him. Anyway, so I'm glad I love that you thought it was astounding, Doug. I think it is astounding. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of poetry ever. And it's not that famous. And I just find it incredible that it's not that famous, because it's just glorious. I heard there's a website that I love and I've been contributing to financially now for about 10 years, a website called Brain Pickings. And that's where I discovered Barkowski. The young lady who runs it's called Maria Popova. She's another character that is just beyond compare, I think. And she loves Barkowski. And I just love the fact that he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't have any political bones in his body. He just says it as it is. Doug says, really connected with where I am in my life right now. I hope that's a good thing, Doug. I think it could be a good thing. If you are willing to do it, do it, do it. Well, we're coming to the end, but of course, I always end with one of my own stories. And at the moment, I've got a plan now, guys. I've finally worked out how to get guests on here and do it properly so we can see each other and I can spotlight people, etc. It's a bit different to using Zoom, so I've had to take a little bit of time. So I'll be looking for volunteers shortly, and I'll tell you what next week's about, and maybe one of you could join me live on the show. But this week, I'm going to end now. I'm not claiming to be a poet, right? But occasionally I write poetry, and occasionally I'm quite pleased with it. This is a poem, Artefact. Here we go. This week's artefact, right? That there is a gonk. And he's a rather old, worn gonk, as you can probably see here. It's held together literally by blue tack. And this is his sword fell off, so I got a toothpick and coloured it in with black ink, so it looks as if he's still got a sword. This is the McArthur tartan. And I'm quite a proud Scot, and I've spent, thank you, mate. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand Scotland better, because unlike Ireland, and I'm jealous of this, the Irish tradition has this incredible array of poets and writers. And in the Scottish tradition, we have Burns and McGonagall, and that's about it. Now, there are a lot more, I know, but they're the two, one, known for his, he's the archetypal Scottish poet, the other known for his bad poetry. But I think that's a shame. And when I'm investigating things, and I get quite carried away with myself, particularly with Scotland, and I like to look for things that people haven't really seen before or haven't come across before. And I discovered something, it's about 5 years ago, a character from Scottish history that, thanks for the link there, Paul, for the road stuff. Thank you very much. And this character, and I'm not going to tell you about him, I'm going to let you hear the poem first. This character was called Joseph Knight. And I bet your bottom dollar, 99% of you have never heard of Joseph Knight. 99% of Scots have never heard of Joseph Knight. So these are my words, and I'm cringing, but these are my words. Please be gentle. Joseph Knight. Wedderburn, son of an executed Jacobite, determined to restore his family's name and fortune from exile in Jamaica. With guile and forced labour the plantations grew. At the monthly market his heart went out to a crushed child, so he paid, and taking the boy's hand he led him away from chains and cruelty. The rescued boy, with the given name Joseph Knight, was set to his master's service. Educated with consent and pride, Knight became a valuable household servant and friend. When at last beckoned home, Wedderburn returned to Scotland with his trusted knight. Then, when love came, Joseph asked for release to make a home with Annie and his child. His friend refused. Freedom taken is freedom coveted, and buttressed by the Enlightenment's reason, he set against his master's kindness. Crushed again in Perth's law court, he sought higher justice in Edinburgh, where again he was refused. Then, when 3 knights of the Enlightenment brought reason and support, he once again brandished Somerset's sword against his master. No man is by nature the property of another. We sit here to enforce right, not to enforce wrong. There is no better form of slavery. And as Wedderburn returned to Blackness, Joseph turned to the light. Now he looks down through his Saviour's eyes on the misty city as a member of a select society of people who have changed the world and then, by their absence, demonstrated their strength. So that was me trying to summarise quite a long story in poetry. Joseph Knight was the second British slave released, and Joseph Knight was such a powerful character intellectually, and he changed everything in Scotland, and no one knows who he is. And I love the fact that, having fought his friend, and that's the bit I can't get, because he became friends with his captor. That's the bit I was meaning there, with educated by his friend. Despite that, the Wedderburns wouldn't release him, so he fought them. He fought them with their own intellects, and he won. And the bit at the end, it's almost counter today's culture. He was a hugely famous man in Scotland for a very short period of time. But he won his case, and I have this image of him taking his woman's hand, his wife's hand, and just disappearing. And there's no record of him. There's a book, there's a fictional book that someone wrote, and it's a jolly good book actually, a sort of fictional account of what happened afterwards. But there is no record of Joseph Knight. No record after he won his court case. And after the great leaders of the Scottish Enlightenment went on his side and helped him gain his freedom. I think it's a beautiful story, and I wish I was a better poet. But something, I hope. What did you think? Was it okay? It was slightly nerve wracking. I've never really threatened anyone with my own poetry before. Whilst you're thinking or getting yourself off the ground, during the statue outbreak that we had with the tragic death in America and the subsequent Black Lives Matters movement, I was contacted by a playwright, and this playwright had come across my poem, and they're making a film about this, and I've been asked to contribute. And the part that they loved was the statue, obviously, where he's looking over the city through the eyes of the people who freed him. I want to see a statue to Joseph Knight, and that's why I wrote that poem. It's probably not good enough to force the Scottish government to do something, but that's the power of poetry for me. I hope you found all of this week interesting. I hope the point I made about the fact that sometimes a poem gives you something that you just didn't know that you needed, like my experience with David White, resonated with you. Next week, I'm not going to do the one about fun things next week, as I've just threatened you with earlier. I'm going to talk about something completely different in the context of storytelling. And this is something that I think I've got experience of, and it's storytelling at work. And how, if you remember right back to the very first and second episode, it seems so long ago now, it's 5 weeks. I mean, I can't believe I'm doing this for 5 weeks. When I talked about why, facts tell, stories sell, I think that is a great way to consider business and what business is like in the not just the COVID world, the post-COVID world. I think story is part of our toolkit to get us to the future of work that we want and is going to be productive for us all. So thank you very much for listening in. I thought I'd go over time a little bit and a half, so thank you very, very much for everybody staying online. I really appreciate that. Pop any questions in the comments, any observations, and I'll do my best to come back on all of those. I've got the YouTube channel sorted out now, so all the videos go onto YouTube almost immediately now after broadcast, so they're easy to get if you go to my YouTube channel. So I'll just, before I say goodbye, I'll just check to see if there's anything else that anyone else is asking me. No, thank you for my... You need to tell me who you are on YouTube. There's 2 or 3 of you there, and I can't see who you are. I can see Ross, but I can't see the others that are there. So let me know who you are sometime. But thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure once again talking to you all and sharing some of this nonsense that I'm obsessed with you. And I'll see you all next week. But finally, if anyone would like to join me next week, just for 2 or 3 minutes, let me know. I'd love to have a guest, and we can have a chat about what you talk about. But I really like to try that out because I think it's something that we can all learn from each other. And as Doug said earlier, it really connected with him today. That poem really connected. I think next week we can really connect with what it's like at work and how we can use stories to change how it is. So thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week.